Hey there, Emma here from Paint Wild, and today we are going to be talking about how do you actually select the 3 primary colours for your limited palette. Don't stress if you're thinking, wait, but I wouldn't even know how to turn them into a colour wheel. That's okay, that's coming, but you are going to need your primary colours so you can paint the wheels with me. So in this video, we are going to cover considerations to take into account when choosing your primaries, characteristics of individual colours, and why that might impact your choices. And then I'm going to go through all of these beautiful colour wheels and show you a ton of different results that I got from substituting different primaries in and out so you can get an idea of the kind of results you'll get depending on what you choose. Last week I shared watercolour supplies I recommend for beginners or anyone who's just frustrated with watercolour or looking for a change, and that included just 3 primary colours. My philosophy is less is more, and that reducing the variables of watercolour will actually allow you to grasp the medium quicker. You could sit down and paint with the same colours, the same brushes, the same paper, paint the same thing on 2 different days and get 2 very different results just because the humidity is different. So my goal is to help you simplify the learning process, get a handle on the techniques of watercolour sooner by reducing the variables and reducing your supplies. At the end of the day though, the best primary colours are the ones that you have. So if you don't want to go out and buy more paint, that's fine. Just grab a yellow, red and blue from your current set and you can learn plenty about colour theory and mixing from them, even if all you're learning is you don't like them. So let's just back up a little bit. Why even have a limited palette of primaries? There's a little bit of tradition there. It's kind of like an old school thing to do, but for me, I'm more interested because it reduces the overwhelm. And to me, I see it speed up the learning of, obviously I saw it for myself and for a lot of my students as well. Not only that, you can save money because you're not going out and having to buy a ton of colors. You only need to buy 3, or you can put that budget that you were going to put towards, a whole bunch of okay colors and instead invest in some really high quality ones because you only need a few. And something I didn't mention last week, which is actually so important, is that it can create more harmonious paintings. When you mix from the primaries, all of the colors that come from them are going to be related back to them and they're just going to get along better on paper. Until you learn how colors work and play with each other and you have more time to experience that and play around, it's just a little bit easier to get started with ones that are going to get along better. Now, it's not just as simple as a yellow, red and blue. Different variations of those 3 colors are going to result in different mixes. So I personally subscribe to a more modern color wheel based on CMY, just like a printer, instead of red, yellow, blue. So think of the printer ink, C for cyan, M for magenta, and Y for yellow. We were taught back in school that you can't mix the 3 primary colors, but you can actually mix red from magenta by adding some yellow. I find magenta gives me much more vibrant mixes, even if I actually rarely use it in its magenta form. So what considerations do you need to take into account when choosing your primary colors? Most importantly is personal preference. There is no right or wrong answer, and just because I use a certain primary palette doesn't mean it's going to be the best for you. What kind of colors do you like? What temperature of colors do you like? And temperature is relative. One color could look cool, but then you put it next to something else and it looks warm. But in general, do you prefer cool colors or warm? I'm a cool color girly. I do not like warm colors. You will not find yellows, oranges, or reds in my house or in my closet, but you will find a lot of blues, greens, and purples. You won't find any gold things in my house, but you'll find silver. So I like a cool leaning palette because it's just reflective of everything else I like. What subjects do you paint or are interested in painting? Landscapes? Maybe a more muted or earthy palette would suit you. Maybe even something with granulation in it, even though I was saying last week to avoid it. Maybe you paint people and you need skin tones. Maybe you're gonna need different colors in your primary triad because of that. I unfortunately can't help you with that. I do not paint people and I don't plan to. So if you do and you've got recommendations for either a triad of colors for skin tones or just a couple of good combinations, please leave them in the comments to help someone else. Maybe you like painting wildlife like me, and don't get me wrong, we use a lot of brown, but I do also need bright colors for fish or birds. And with the primary colors I choose, I get a wide variety. Not only do I get my beautiful, bright, vibrant colors, but through learning color theory and how to mix colors, I know how to use the complements, not only to work well with each other, but to neutralize each other and give me the browns, blacks, and grays that I need. So really have a think about the subjects that you paint most and what color palette they might call for. Now let's talk about characteristics of actual paint colors that may influence the choices you make. I recommended some of this stuff last week, one of them being I recommend finding single pigment colors for your primaries. The more pigments in one color, the more likely they'll get muddy when you start introducing others and mixing it around, so keep it simple and clean with single pigment colors. That's not to say that multiple pigment colors don't make beautiful mixes. Payne's Grey, for example, my one true love, makes beautiful greens when you mix it with a yellow. I mentioned last week to avoid colors with hue in the title, and I actually got an amazing comment left on the last video that was shining more of a positive light on this, mentioning that you may see colors like cadmium red hue, and that is actually a replica of cadmium red, but a safe version, because cadmium colors and other heavy metal pigments can be toxic. And interestingly, when we get to the color wheels you'll see later, the recommended primary from the Winsor & Newton Cotman range is lemon yellow hue. All of their yellows in the Cotman range, by the way, are a hue. They only have 40 in the range, so there's not a whole bunch to choose from, but that's because lemon yellow no longer exists as a pigment because it was considered toxic for, I think, the barium something or other content in it. So I just found that super interesting, and the lemon yellow hue does use the same pigment as Winsor Lemon in the professional range. You'll also want to check to see what characteristics each color has. These are usually listed on the packaging or the manufacturer's website, and they include things like, are they a granulating color? Are they staining? Are they opaque, transparent, semi-opaque, semi-transparent? Do any of these things matter to you, and would they positively or negatively affect the color mixes you need? Like I said last week, I recommend avoiding granulating colors for your primaries, and you'll see some examples in the color wheel shortly, because it just affects everything you mix it with. And sometimes it not only gives the granulating effect to other colors, but the colors actually separate. Is the color staining? Is it going to be really hard to get off the paper once it's down? Does that matter to you? What level of transparency or opacity do you want? I personally go for transparent colors in my primaries, but maybe you'll like something more opaque. You'll only learn if these matter to you through time and trying them out, so don't stress too much, but just note it might affect your mixes. If you have a very opaque color in your mixture, you might find that it just has a lot of hiding power with anything you mix it with. And even though my colors in my own primary palette are considered transparent, I just find that my yellow is very opaque. And even though it's yellow, I feel like I have to use it quite sparingly to actually get that transparency. You can check their light fastness rating as well. How likely are they to fade or change color with time, and does that matter to you? We'll take a look at a color wheel later that includes fugitive colors, which are known to fade or change over time. Anything with a light fastness rating of 1 or 2 is generally going to be really good and will be fine for 50 plus years. Really, this is only super duper important if you want to create artwork that is going to be a commission or go in an exhibition or just last a really long time. If you're just painting for fun, painting in your own sketchbook, you don't have to stress too much about this stuff. If you've still got no idea where to start, you can just let someone else choose for you. You can either have a look at the color wheels we're about to see, or just Google the brand you want to buy from and recommended primaries in watercolor, and they'll generally recommend the best from their range that will give you the most variety of mixes. If you're wondering my personal preference, I look for bright and saturated colors that I then have the choice to water down. I want the ability to mix a wide variety of 12 colors in my color wheel. I don't want any to look too similar or be too tricky to differentiate between. I want the ability to mix complements from them and create neutrals if I want, not be stuck with dull colors to begin with. And I don't want any special effects like granulation or opacity. Let's now take a look at some color wheels. I have been mixing up a storm. So first up, we have Winsor Lemon, Permanent Rose, and Winsor Blue Red shade. These are the 3 recommended primary colors from Winsor & Newton's professional series range. And as you can see, they create a beautiful set of colors. So here we have a comparison between the Winsor & Newton professional series watercolor range, recommended primaries, and the Cotman Student series range of recommended primaries. But like I mentioned, they use the same pigment for the yellow, so it looks very similar, although this one is a hue. The same pigment for the recommended primary red, which is Permanent Rose. However, the blues differ. Winsor Blue Red shade is in the professional series, Ultramarine is in the Cotman series. They do have a sort of phthalo blue, so I'm not sure why they don't use that one for the recommended primaries in the Cotman range. I only have these 3 from Cotman, so I couldn't test it to check. But as you can see, the French Ultramarine, it gives that granulating effect to all of these colors that it is mixed with. This wheel looks a little bit more vibrant than this one on first glance, but I'm about to show you a wheel where I substitute this for French Ultramarine so that I'm matching all 3 pigments. They're looking much more similar now, so I've replaced the Winsor Blue Red shade with French Ultramarine from the professional series range, and all the color mixes are looking a lot more similar. I don't have any problem with the quality from the Cotman series range, other than the fact that the granulating effect of Ultramarine just affects all those mixes. I mean, to me, I do also feel it like feels a little bit different on the palette and painting with it, but at the end of the day, the results are great. Let's start subbing some primaries in and out and see what differences we get. This here is Winsor Lemon, Permanent Rose, but now I've swapped the blue. Winsor Blue red shade from the original, Winsor Blue green shade. And it's pretty obvious the difference here. The greens are a lot more punchy, probably a little too much for me, and they feel a little artificial. This looks like a phthalo green, or if you know my range, seaweed, and it is a very intense green. I definitely prefer these mixes. But interestingly enough, when you go from the 3 recommended primaries from Winsor & Newton's professional series to the 6 recommended primaries for a split palette, they take this blue out and use French Ultramarine and then add this one in for the cool one. We'll explore split primaries in future and you can see how they all interact with each other. This time I wanted to see what would happen if I swap out the more magenta red for a traditional red. So we've got here Scarlet Lake, same blue, same yellow. And as you can see, the main difference here is the purples. They are just a lot less vibrant. They're beautiful colors in and of themselves, but I would much prefer to have this and then have the option to add a little bit of the complement of yellow and dull it down than be stuck with this. It does make some great warm colors though. This time I've swapped the yellow and the red. So we've got Winsor Yellow now instead of lemon, Scarlet Lake instead of Permanent Rose, and I've got the original Winsor Blue red shade. I really like the greens that were made. I think this is a beautiful color here. Again, the warms are really beautiful, but it really lets me down in the violet area, and these are very important to me. They might not be to you though. Now I've swapped out the whole triad, so we've got Winsor Yellow, Scarlet Lake, and French Ultramarine. I actually think this is a pretty good palette. I quite like all the mixes. I feel like the purples are looking a lot better. The greens are lovely. So are the warm colors. It's really just the granulation that would put me off that one, I think. I then wanted to try this color wheel, but replacing the Scarlet Lake and going back to Permanent Rose. And I do think that made it even better. Again, it's just the granulation, and you can really see the separation of the blue in these mixes. Now for something a little bit different, here's our original, and here is a very muted earthy set of primaries. So we've got here Yellow Ochre, Burnt Sienna, and French Ultramarine. A couple of granulating colors, nothing too bright and crazy except for the blue really, but maybe if you're into landscapes and just a certain natural color palette and lots of texture, this might be one that you're interested in. I also wanted to show you a color wheel with those fugitive colors I was talking about. So I've got here the original Winsor Lemon. This is Opera Rose, which has a dye in it, which does not last. And this is Prussian Blue. Now, despite Winsor & Newton saying this has a light fastness of 1, when I looked this color up for more information, and handprint.com is a great resource by the way, the tests that were carried out on the Prussian Blues on that website said that they're just very inconsistent with their light fastness. I haven't done any of my own tests to agree with that or not, but I thought I'd put them all together and show you. They create a beautiful arrangement of colors, but I just wouldn't recommend them if you're wanting to create artwork that's going to last. And finally, I wanted to take things a bit literally. What if you went to the art store and got Winsor Yellow, because it says yellow, Quinacridone Magenta, because I was talking about that one, and Phthalo Turquoise, because I was saying phthalo and a turquoisey kind of color. Beautiful mixes again. I particularly love the purples. They're absolutely stunning, but the greens a little bit artificial for me. You could tone them down with the complement, but I love the warms. Here's an example of a primary color triad if you're literally just grabbing some colors out of your existing collection. I went over to my collection of Winsor & Newton, which is quite vast, and I picked out Naples Yellow, Scarlet Lake, which we've been familiar with, and French Ultramarine, which we've also been familiar with. Now, what I learned was, I hate this palette. I hate the intensity of these warms. I feel like they're too strong and it was really hard to get differentiation between them. I don't like the granulating effect that French Ultramarine is just injecting into all the mixes. The purples are too dull for me, and this yellow is a little bit problematic. So it actually has 2 pigments in there, one of them being white, and I just found that it really did give some more opacity to it. I found that it gave me more peachy colors than orange, and like just quite milky looking colors as well. If I compare this to my regular primary color set, so these are the Paint Wild colors, very different. These are mine, as you can see, they're very saturated, but I have the ability to water them down. And I would much rather have the ability to water these down than have these pale kind of milky colors that I've got to constantly build up. And by the time you do, you lose any transparency in your paintings. Last year in the Paint Wild membership, I also did some color experimentations to see what would be the results of different primary colors, how their secondaries would look, and what neutrals I could get with them. The recommended primaries from Winsor & Newton gave me a beautiful, delicious black. Don't judge my neutrals too much. You can definitely get better ones than that and more pigmented. But you can see the French Ultramarine really affecting all the mixes there, separating and granulating. The Scarlet Lake turning the orange really bright, but the purple's really dull. And the warm yellows just really muting those greens. I just wanted to show you this so you could see that even if you are choosing super bright primaries, you can still neutralize them. I hope you found this video helpful and you are well equipped to head to the paint store or dig out some colors from your collection and get your primaries ready. If you use different primary colors than any of the ones I've featured in this video, I would love to hear it. Leave a comment, share with us the 3 primaries you use and what subjects you love to paint with them. I would love to learn. Stay tuned for next week where I'll show you how to turn your 3 new primary colors into 12. I'll catch you then.